The Seattle Kraken head into a game day with 2 consecutive wins. But is that enough to get this team to where they want to be? Which, of course, is the playoffs. Well, Zaiem and I are going to talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host, alongside Zaiem Beg. We are going to talk Seattle Kraken as the homestand gets its start here in 2025. But first, Zaiem, let's let folks know that today's episode of Locked On Kraken, once again brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to rant about. But Zaiem, Happy New Year. This is the first time we're talking in 2025.
Yeah, it's crazy. We live in a post-2024 world now. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
And I hope that you haven't, whatever resolutions you have are still intact. It's, day 2, so pretty strong chance. I know my resolution made it to day 2, so I'm pretty stoked about it.
There you go. I love that. I love that for us. Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing, you're at least 50%, right? Even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, those are Hall of Fame numbers. So anyway.
I mean, my last year's New Year's resolution was win the Winter Classic every day. And day 1 started out great, but then I just couldn't stick with it.
Yeah. It's, it's a cruel world out there. But, we are going to talk about the Seattle Kraken. And, we want to bring some a little dose of reality. I don't know about you, Zaiem. I'm feeling pretty good. I got to wear the UMA hat that I wear 4 wins, 2 episodes in a row. So I freaking loved that. And so on the one hand, we're starting off 2025, or I should say ending 2024 on a 2-game win streak. We, end the skid, feeling great. We talked about Philip Grubauer, what we were going to get from him. We got some goal support for him. So we're feeling good, right, Zaiem? And then I was like, okay, but is this good enough? And the only way to answer that question is to define, well, what is good enough? I think this team came into this season expecting to be in the playoffs. I really do. I think that the expectation was, with the changes that had been made from the coaching staff to some of the players, that this was going to be a playoff team. So Zaiem, if we think about that, the 2-game win streak leading into 2025, there will be a game tonight. Is this enough for the Seattle Kraken to be able to meet the very tertiary, right? Like early stage goal of just getting back to the playoffs?
It is going to be a tough hill to climb. The numbers are pretty bleak. So if you look at the playoff odds, Money Puck has them at 5%. New York Times has it at 2%, or the Athletic, and then on FanDuel, the implied odds is it's about 5.5%. So depending on who you look at, but it's in the low single digits. And because numbers are on that scale can be weird and abstract, like, okay, well, what does 5% mean? And so one thing I really like as a way to, as an analogy to internalize these things, is take a deck of cards and remove the jokers, shuffle them up, and draw 2 cards. If they're both a queen or better, that's 5% and the Kraken are in the playoffs. All other outcomes are not. But sometimes you're going to draw a king and a queen, or an ace and a queen, or an ace and a king, right? Those happen, right? So, but if you want to kind of get a sense of how often it happens, you can, I'm sure there's an app online you could simulate it and you can see how often that happens. But so not 0, like a very meaningful not 0. but it's not great.
Right. Not zero, sure. But like you said, also not great. And that's where, I mean, really hunkering down into what this team needs to be able to be successful is huge. I mean, I appreciate you putting this into terms. I know cards and decks and things of that nature, but I think also it's it's an easy thing to, if you've ever picked up a deck of cards, to be able to get to that. I think that the reason, though, that the two games are important, and I don't want to overlook them, but we can't be satisfied, I guess, is where I'm landing with this same, is because to improve the odds, to continue to see those numbers go up in any of the different playoff odds that we've talked about, the Seattle Kraken have to win games. So you have to start winning 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then like you have to start with 2 consecutive wins, but it can't end there. And that's been the issue with this Seattle Kraken team. We've talked about consistency in all kinds of ways, Zaiem, but stringing together wins is not their strong suit. I mean, even last year's team around this time, they were able to, a la the Winter Classic, they were able to parlay some wins around that Winter Classic, leading up to the Winter Classic, going into 2024, and then on the other side as well. This team, save for, I guess it was that homestand in November, they've had a lot of difficulty winning games consecutively.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to how inconsistent the Kraken have been. I mean, that's the only consistent thing, is how inconsistent they are. And so, trying to predict what this team is going to do on any given night has been an absolute disaster from a having a clue standpoint. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. What we can say is, if the Kraken want to make the playoffs, they're going to need to win 8 in a row, 7 out of 8, 7 out of 9, maybe a couple stretches like that, which is really what they did during their playoff year. They had really looked really, really bad right before the New Year. They just got blown out by Edmonton. And then on New Year's Day, they played well against the Islanders, and they ended up winning their next 8 games. And then all of a sudden, now the Kraken were back in the playoffs. But it was pretty bleak on New Year's Day back then too. So I think this team's probably more talented than the one 2 years ago. But I mean, it's the Kraken have run out of all of their room for error, and they can't afford a hiccup. They can't afford a stretch of bad luck. They can't afford a rash of injuries. They can't afford Vince Dunn to miss any time ever again. So, a lot has to go right, but if they do, you draw a queen, you draw a king, and now we're playing in May.
Yeah, and a lot has to go right. And I think it's so interesting talking about this roster, because I hear what you're saying, drawing a king, drawing a queen in a 2-card draw, that's difficult. But the deck should be stacked in the Kraken's favor, at least on paper, comparative to, like you just said, seasons past. I think this is one of the arguably best on paper rosters that we've seen from the Seattle Kraken. I would even double down, and we were talking about this offline a little bit. I would even double down and say this is my personal, I have so much confidence in the D core for this Seattle Kraken team, not just the individual defenders. I think the D pairings have worked really well, but defense is still a problem for the Seattle Kraken. And coming up next on the show, Zaiem, I'm going to have you guide us through how we can be talking about good defensemen and still talk about bad defense for this Seattle Kraken team. And Dan Bylsma weighs in. So if you don't believe us, then go take it up with Disco Dan. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Game Time. This is probably my favorite app to talk about, Zaiem, because especially when I go to the Emerald City, I'm always using the Game Time app. when it's M season. I know I like to sit third baseline. Also like to make sure, I'm not too close. I don't want any line drives messing up my beautiful smile. or anyone trying to catch a line drive for that matter, a foul ball punching me out. So always love to check out the views from the seats. But, there's so many other things that are great with Game Time. And now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature. It's called Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Also, highly recommend some of the toggle features, which give you the all-in pricing upfront so you can make sure you stay within your budget. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, you can create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks as always for making Locked on Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here with Zaiem Beg of Davy Jones Locker Room. And we are giving you a game day episode of Locked on Kraken. And we are going to give you some keys to the game. But first, Zaiem, we got to talk about my favorite topic. Not always my favorite topic to talk about with respect to the Seattle Kraken, but that's defense. This is something Dan Bylsma mentioned it. A lot of people mentioned it coming out of last season. The Seattle Kraken actually had pretty good defensive numbers last year. I still had my beef from my eye test. We'll talk about that later. But let's talk about where this team was, Zaiem, last year under Dave Haxtell with defense. And what are the numbers showing us early returns-ish? Because, we're not quite halfway, but Dan Bylsma and his crew are kind of thinking of this, that they're beyond the halfway point. So where are we now when it comes to defense this season? And we'll get into what we think is causing the difference in just a little bit. But what are the numbers telling us, Zaiem?
Okay, so I want you to go back in time and think back all the way to last year. And you think about, oh man, this Kraken defense and how frustrating it was at times under Dave Haxtell. Now you think about this year, and this defense is much, much, much worse. So that's not a great place to start. Last year, the Kraken actually allowed the fewest high danger shots of any team in the NHL. So that team was really good at keeping shots to the outside. And in terms of expected goals against, they were second best after Carolina. So yeah, they had their lapses, and maybe the times that they had their lapses were in high leverage moments, and maybe that was a tendency of the Haxtell regime. But now you go to this year, and instead of allowing the fewest high danger shots, the Kraken are allowing the second most high danger shots after the lowly San Jose Sharks. They are they're the seventh worst in expected goals against. And so for whatever your criticisms were of Dave Haxtell, the defense is much, much better than this year's. And, to your point, as you said, the defensemen, they're good. Like, they're really good. It's not really a defenseman problem where this is coming from.
Oh, and that's so frustrating and we've talked about goaltending before. We talked specifically about Philip Grubauer and defense in front of him and goaltending. And I get it. Some of the Grubauer numbers are not great. Don't love to see them. And again, to put all of that on just goaltending, and actually at today's morning skate on Thursday, Dan Bylsma, he kind of made, or I forget if it was actually today or yesterday, this week, Dan Bylsma alluded to the fact that, it's tough. A lot of the expectation for wins or losses fall right on the shoulders of the goaltending. And I think there's an, a very simplistic, obvious, it's kind of like blaming the pitcher, right, for a win or a loss. They're the ones kind of steering the ship, so to speak, in a very real ways in sports. The goaltender in hockey, the pitcher in baseball. And least in baseball, right? Pitchers aren't batting for the most part. For the most part, there are some outliers. In hockey, goaltenders aren't scoring. There are some outliers, but overwhelmingly, right? So the wins and losses falling on their shoulder isn't fair from that perspective. But with a team like the Kraken, there are things that are happening on the ice, in the offensive zone, in the defensive zone, in the neutral zone, that are not the first and full responsibility or even something that the goaltender can control, but the goaltender and the defense have to clean up the mess. And that's what we're talking about. It's the things in open ice beyond just what's happening in the crease, which I could get into on another show, on another podcast. But that's the frustrating part, is because not only are some of these things that we're seeing that count as defensive statistics, are they really not the fault of our blue liners, our defensemen, and or our goaltenders, but they're also their effort plays. And I think Dan Bylsma really broke this down expertly. So we're going to head to him and what he said at yesterday's practice regarding defense and where the Kraken defense is right now.
I think I think our defensive play has been inconsistent because of our puck play. And when you turn over the puck, when you aren't connected, and you don't execute with your puck play, it leads to transition defense, and that's the hardest defense to play. So I think our defense and how we play it is only as good as we are with the puck. So, and I think that you talk about the reference the shot mentality. I think last game, go to the Carolina game, some of our best defensive games were because of our execution and our puck play, and just the mentality of which we execute with the puck was north, was behind their defense, and that's the best place to play defense from.
And so I think there are a lot of different things, right, that Dan is alluding to. But one of them is that our defensive play, specifically thinking about the transition offense that this team is giving up, thus our transition defense is significantly hurt by the inability for the Seattle Kraken to hang on to the puck.
And you can look at the culprits, and there is, Andre Burakovsky has always been a turnover machine, and it's just something you lived with because he brought so much offense. Now we're not seeing any of the offense, but we're still seeing the turnover machine, and he's been on a line who's with a real bad influence in Chandler Stephenson.
Ugh,
and
brutal.
So I can understand how people can look at the box scores. They can look at the score sheets and say, okay, Chandler Stephenson, he's fourth on the team in points. And that's true. It is then a testament to how impressive he has been at being bad at everything else. That he is still, arguably the worst skater in the NHL. So we've got.
Oh dear God!
You want to pull up that graphic here?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yes, I'll grab it. So this is what you were talking about with us earlier.
Yes.
Oh man. So let's just walk through it for those who are not. Unfortunately, you got to join the YouTube party. But for those not watching on YouTube, what are we looking at right now, Zaiem?
So we're looking at a player card that's made by Jay Fresh, although I think he uses the data from Patrick Bacon. And basically, here's the real short of it is his win over replacement percentage. So a replacement level being just some random person that he was at the very bottom of the league. He is in the first percentile of that. So he is essentially in the bottom 1% of the entire NHL. And then you can go through and you can look at, his offense and defense, even strength. So 2%, 0%. So the one thing that he does bring is he is like average at percentage on the power play. So, and then everything else, you can see, it's when it comes to goals and the penalty kill. He's on the penalty kill and he's awful. It's just bad. Like you can just look at the numbers, you can and dig into them and see like, oh yeah, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. Or you can just glance at it and go, wow, that's a lot of red, and those numbers are really low. And if you look at Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon's one, you're going to see a lot of 99s and 98s and 100s. So that's what we're looking at here. And then a natural stat trick. I looked in. So his out of 605 skaters with at least 200 minutes, Chandler Stephenson ranks 605 in expected goal share 5-on-5. So you cannot you like take the Sharks, take the Blackhawks, take a really, really terrible team, and then take the worst skater on that team and who's gotten any sort of playing time. Chandler Stephenson has been worse than that person, and there's a good chance he's been significantly worse than that person. Like, he is the worst player statistically in the NHL this year, and he is getting paid like he is a top centerman. It's okay. Only 536 games more until he's a free agent. So we just got to ride out the next 6.5 years, and we're good.
Gosh. Well, when you say it like that, it's even more frustrating. And if you think that we're picking on Chandler Stephenson, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. We are. And it's because of especially that last point that you just made. When you are getting paid the way Chandler Stephenson is getting paid, these numbers cannot fly. When you are a team and your top line, or one of your top six, right? Or one of your top two centermen, in theory, right? At least on how we see the projected lines listed, is putting up these kinds of numbers with a team that, as you broke down for us, Zaiem, has digressed, right? They are worse in defense than they were last year. Make it make sense to me. So what is the role that the Stephenson line is playing right now? Well, we don't know because Dan Bylsma hasn't told us. He's mentioned what every other line's role is. And then he was asked, I think it was Darren Brown was like, well, you talked about every other line except for the Stephenson line with with McCann and Burakovsky. Thank you. That's his name. So have you thought about sprucing up that line? And he kind of gives one of his Dan Bylsma shakes like, yeah, I've thought about it, but what do you want me to do when I just told you all the other lines are doing what they're supposed to do? So what is the solution here? I don't know, but it's endlessly frustrating right now, Zaiem, to know that one of our top paid free agents this past summer is also not just one of the worst on the Kraken team when it comes to being able to produce, especially on the defensive side, but that's actually bottom of the barrel in the entire NHL. Like, that is endlessly frustrating.
And it's not like this was unforeseeable. I know the Burakovsky signing has not worked out, and I know the Philip Grubauer signing has not worked out. But when it happened, it was reasonable. Like the Burakovsky deal, nobody really was saying like, that's a lot of money for that guy. It's like, man, that guy's really good. He should get a lot of money. And Philip Grubauer was like, he was a Vezina finalist, right?
Right.
When they signed Chandler Stephenson, it was like, oh, well, he's not great, but like for maybe $2 million, and you're like, he got what for how much?
Well, again, not a great defensive team. Unfortunately, Chandler Stephenson is one of the players that we can point to just not really understanding why this team, isn't performing better. I think that when you have the contract that he has, when he has the role that he has, you have to figure it out. And so is this a matter of that he knows what needs to be done, but he doesn't want to do it? And that's the difference. You can say a lot of things about the Dave Haxtell era, but the Seattle Kraken did the job that needed to be done. Now, if they were able to be above average at the job, that was sometimes, right, the question. But the job got done. Sometimes, I'll be honest, Zaiem, it feels like this particular Kraken team, there are some elements at times where, and maybe Stephenson is one of them, where intellectually, this team knows what they need to do. Statistically and on paper, and as far as confidence, this team knows that they can do it. So then the only difference between the Seattle Kraken stringing together, as you said, 7, 8, 9 wins and not, is them deciding to string together 7, 8, 9 wins together. And what do you need to do? It goes back to what Dan Bylsma said. It goes back to what I preach on Locked On Kraken all of the time. This is not a Seattle Kraken team right now. Consistently, with any consistency, they, to me, don't seem like a team that goes into a game, that goes into a period, that goes into a head-to-head and says, I'm winning this puck. Not enough. They don't commit to doing what it takes to win the puck. And if you don't win the puck, you're giving up an opportunity for the opponent in transition, like Dan Bylsma said.
It's hard to score when you don't have the puck.
Well, yeah, literally, yes. Yeah. But then also when you are out of position where you probably shouldn't be and you lose the puck, then that goes back to our defensemen having to clean up, but especially our goaltenders having to clean up mistakes that happen, maybe not a full 200 feet, but that happen ahead of them. Too often that has happened. Not just a this year issue, but this year seems most egregious because, again, on paper, this is the best Seattle Kraken team we've ever had. So at some point, you've got these veterans, you've got Stanley Cup winners. Just do it. I mean, I know it's a slogan, but is it? It really is that simple sometimes. Just do it. And so I'm hoping that the Kraken can do just that. We, of course, ranted as I knew we were going to. So if you're listening to this, we're probably going to break down the full rant in its own little mini episode because it deserves to be watched in full. But we'll trim it down for today's game day episode because coming up on Locked On Kraken, we still want to get you. I know we went into a lot of the dark area there, the things we don't like, but we do think there are some key things that the Seattle Kraken team can do and likely needs to do to go up against a Vancouver team who they just played. So who's got the juice, Zaiem? I guess we'll find out, and we'll talk about what it's going to take for the Kraken to be on the victorious side of tonight's matchup. All that coming up on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. And we know the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, we mentioned the Kraken odds to make the playoffs right now, plus 800. So as you said, roughly equating to just under 6% odds right there. The money line has them at minus 130 against Vancouver tonight. But there's so many ways, whether it's looking at the Kraken odds, looking at NFL odds, that you can pick up a W. If you love betting on which players will score a touchdown or how many each team will score. All of it is right there on FanDuel, and it is thrilling. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League and us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Oh, Zaiem, it is still a game day. And although, we don't really like what the Stephenson line is bringing as of right now, hopefully, they can listen to what Dan Bylsma is saying, commit a little bit more to the discipline that is required to win games, because we need a winning streak. Because as we said at the top of the show, 2 games, it's a good start, but it's not nearly enough. There's still a large hill for this Kraken team to climb, and it starts tonight. So you've got at least 3. We've got some carryover as well, but we have at least 3 things, Zaiem, that we want to see the Kraken do. Let's start with point number 1.
I'm going to sound like every hockey coach ever, but it's some cliches are there because they're true, and that's start on time. If you start chasing the game, your win percentage plummets. So if you give up that first goal, now instead of being 50-50, which this game is, according to the FanDuel odds, I was a little surprised to see that they're a slight favorite, but it's like 52%. That drops down to like 20%. Right. And then you have to work to get back to 50. And so just in terms of your chances of winning the game, you got to score first. You just have to. And giving up a bad turnover, a bad goal is just buries you with mental mistakes. And now all of a sudden your chance of winning the game. And then it happens a little too much this season.
Yes.
Or a lot too much.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's interesting when we look at these 2 teams, the record for the Vancouver Canucks when they're leading after just the first period. So the first 20 minutes, they're 6-2-3. When they're trailing, that goes down to 6-6-2. The Seattle Kraken 5-1-2 when leading after the first frame. Doesn't happen for us very often. 7-11-0 when trailing. Now things pick up though for the Kraken in particular, or I would say leading after 2 periods seems even more significant for the Seattle Kraken. They are 9-0 when leading after the first 2 frames, 2-18-1 when trailing. That's huge. Also, the Vancouver Canucks 0-9-3 when trailing after 2 periods. So as important as the start is, it goes beyond just the first 20 minutes. It's really, at least in this matchup, it's really the first 40 minutes that we're looking at that are going to be huge here. Okay, what's point number 2 for you, Zaiem? One of the keys to the game, the Seattle Kraken will win tonight against Vancouver if?
They limit turnovers. Just don't make hope plays. Don't, blind passes to a teammate that you think is there and then turns out not to be. Again, I'm going to sound like a hockey coach here, but just keep it simple. Simple plays. Just you don't get too fancy. In poker, there's a term called fancy play syndrome, where you try to you run like a check raise bluff with like a min raise, and it's like, man, what are you doing? Because then you end up just losing a bunch of money when that happens. It's like, no, just play good, solid, mathematical, fundamental poker, and that's the same thing with hockey. Just be smart and don't get too fancy, because the turnovers lead to goals the other way, and that's what's killing this team.
Yep, and we talked about it in depth a lot and ranted about it, that transition, right, that Dan Bylsma's talking about. Also love that you talked about hope plays or hope passes, those everydayers and OGers. That's one thing that Tad O'Had, our general manager and head coach of the Kansas City Mavericks, he talks about a lot, and how he's able to get consistent play from his players by really being critical when he sees too many of those hope, HOPE passes. All right. Point number 3, Zaiem. What do you like as far as the Kraken setting themselves up to win this game against Vancouver?
Well, so Joey Decord is not is still injured. He has a bruise that Dan Bylsma said is going to take a little longer to heal from. So we're going to see Philip Grubauer in net tonight, barring anything weird. And so look, Philip Grubauer, he was really good in his last start against Utah. He allowed 2 goals, but the Utah generated 4 expected goals. 2 goals above expected is great, right? I mean, that's just a really strong quality start. It's just, he's only had 15 starts, right? And so 4 of them were quality starts. So, but the thing is, and we've talked about this, we talked about this last week. You talked about this, I think, on yesterday's show, is that Grubauer, he tends to play better when he gets a few starts in a row. And we discussed this, but I looked up and I saw that, last year, he had 6 games in a row above 900, and there were 6 consecutive starts, right? And then 2 years ago, his best stretch also came on 4 consecutive starts. And so when he gets into a rhythm, when he gets a chance to kind of settle in and see the puck and figure out what the defense is doing in front of him, because it's a really, really important part, Grubauer plays better. So if you're not a Grubauer lover, because you've been frustrated with this play, understandable. But also there's a little bit of hope here that he's playing better. He's playing better statistically and also stylistically on the eye test. We talked about this as well, is that he's challenging shooters. He's more aggressive. I think his positioning is better. And I think that his play has been better. And so I'm like kind of excited to see what he does tonight, because honestly, Erica, I mean, Joey Daccord is so beloved, but there is really nothing like when Climate Pledge is full and the whole place explodes into grooves after a big save. It is one of my favorite things in the world. I just love that atmosphere, and it's fun when Grubauer is good. It's so much fun.
Yes, indeed. And we need him. I think that we talked about that, and we didn't know at the time, right? But I'm glad we really dived into, well, what happens if Joey doesn't come back on Monday? Because now it's been this will be the 3rd game that he will not suit up. So this is something that's a little bit more lingering. And what we said, chief among all of the different scenarios, is that, Philip, hello, what is his name? Philip Grubauer. Philip has to just really step into his full game and his full potential. And so you talked about start on time. That starts with Philip Grubauer. Now, to your point, I love you broke down the stats. Him having more starts, more consistent starts, consecutive starts, is usually, statistically speaking, going to benefit Philip Grubauer, and that's going to benefit this team. We have also seen him get some goal support, though. So that's another thing. This is not just on Philip Grubauer. We've mentioned it so many different ways throughout this episode and throughout the last several on this show. This really has to be this team committing to being better, committing to discipline, and at least according to Dan Bylsma and your 2 hosts right here, that has to be a focus to be better on the defensive side of things, to be better with puck play, and to really just want to have possession of the puck, to not lose that possession, at least not without a fight, Zaiem. So very curious to see who will have the juice in tonight's matchup. Things definitely got spicy against Utah. At times they got spicy in Vancouver. So we'll see what this Kraken team can do. I do think that they've been able to take on the physicality of other teams without bending and yielding to it. So that's another thing I think that will be critical for this Kraken team. But we got to get you ready to suit up for Climate Pledge Arena, Zaiem. We thank you as always for joining us here. But before you go, let us know what you have cooking over at Davy Jones' locker room.
So we just had coverage of the World Juniors, and so if you missed all that, you can go back and look at that, specifically how the Kraken prospects did. Allison Ballard did a really, really fantastic piece about Finnish goaltending and the Kraken's relationship to that in the organization. She spent a lot of time on it. It's really well researched. It's got a lot of quotes from different people. It's really just like a plus piece, and the kind of long form journalism that has kind of gone away, but I think is really important. So first and foremost, I would check that out. And then we have a new podcast called the Cephalopod, but everything you can find it at DavyJonesLockerRoom.com.
Fantastic. And of course, Locked on Kraken, you can continue to find us here. And I will be headed out to Seattle soon. Head out tomorrow. So we will have some coverage of not this Vancouver game, but we have Edmonton and New Jersey coming up. And in between, of course, there is the PWHL Takeover Tour. So not only for Locked on Kraken, but also for the Women's Hockey Report, which airs on the Locked on NHL channel. You can check out some of the reporting live from Climate Pledge Arena and Kraken Community Iceplex for some of the activations over there. But for Zaiem, my name again, Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked on Kraken. Make sure to be kind to yourself first and foremost. That gives you hopefully the energy to be kind to others. And it's a game day, so make sure you hold fast, you stay true, and loud and proud we say, let's go Kraken. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.